Cool. Hello, everybody. Today we're chatting with Kobi of the ProPeace report on YouTube. You also see his Twitter handle there. He's also a member of the
ProPeace report on
Indie
YouTube. You
News.
also see his.
There we
you
go.
hear the echo?
Yeah, I had it going on in I had like a YouTube.
True. I thought it was on my end for a second.
No, it's fine. So no worries. And we're both, members of the Indie News Network. So I just kind of wanted to, first chat, I guess, about your kind of experience studying and living in Sweden, right?
Yeah, Sweden.
Yeah. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that, kind of what it's like living and studying there, and social democracy. I call it like capitalism with the human face, as opposed to here in the United States, and just kind of experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice living in Sweden. I mean, as an American, I still have the financial problems of America following me there. Like, student loans. Swedish people actually get college for free. Like, there's no tuition for college. They have to pay for their living expenses, but they get grants and loans for that. Not nearly as much. Even students in the EU get the same benefit. But for me as an American, I still had to pay, I think the 2 years for the program is $20,000 or something like that. And so I'm getting student loans through FAFSA. There are some universities you can do that. But, I mean, otherwise, it's not terribly different as an American. I can go to the doctor there for cheaper than even in America. That's kind of nice. Like, the way it works there is that instead of having, a health insurance company and you have to see where it qualifies and stuff like that, it's basically all government-run healthcare. And there are caps on different prices. So, like, let's say hypothetically for surgeries, you pay $150 for the whole year, and then anything over that's free. So whereas in America, you get cancer or you get something else really serious and you're going to go tens of thousands of dollars into debt. Even as an American in Sweden, I wouldn't have that same problem. But otherwise, I mean, it's just kind of nice being in a different environment than the U.S., kind of hearing different perspectives. That's why I went to Sweden instead of studying the U.S., partially because it's cheaper, but partially because I wanted to learn about their welfare system, how they see it. There are still socialist critiques of Sweden. Like, socialists in Sweden would tell you, it's not a socialist country. It is capitalism, welfare capitalism, basically. So a little bit better of a welfare system, but like they have 80% union membership, which is amazing compared to America. Yeah. But then they would still tell me problems like there's not elections to get rid of. Like, you have elections once a year for your union membership, but you don't have elections for like the decisions they make, and you don't have processes to get rid of them if you don't like them. So there are still, socialist critiques of the way they do things there, but still better than the U.S., I think.
And then, so the university that you're studying at, it sounds like there's, quite a bit of different people from just outside of Sweden and just other European countries too. Is that correct?
Yeah. So my program is, I'm going to Lund University. It's in southern Sweden, right by Denmark, right by Copenhagen. And yeah, I'm in a human rights master's degree program. We have students from Chile, students from mostly Europe. There's some from New Zealand and Australia. It's actually really unfortunate and kind of goes a little bit to the racism that you kind of see in the socialist or in the Swedish system still, where we had one student from Africa who was in our program, and she couldn't come right away because they hadn't approved her visa. So she was doing online classes with us for about a month and a half. And then all of a sudden they just declined her visa, but they wouldn't give her an explanation of why they declined her visa. And so we were all like, is it a coincidence that the one African Muslim student in our program got not allowed into the country for some reason? And then I started learning about, when they had the refugee crisis in Europe earlier in the 2010s, and Sweden let in a lot of refugees, but they weren't really putting in enough resources to help the refugees once they got to America. So a lot of refugees had complaints about this welfare system there because they weren't getting all the aid they needed. But in general, it's just nice being able to hear, because even just hearing the difference between American opinions on politics and European students' opinions on politics is very, very, very different.
And then, yeah, I think you had mentioned that one of the reasons that you went to study in Sweden was because it was actually, I mean, that's pretty insane. Like our higher education system, it's actually cheaper to go study abroad than it would have been to
Yeah.
stay in the United States. And when I was looking into getting into master's programs, I was looking at this going to school in Germany. Potentially, it would have actually been cheaper to move to Germany, get a master's degree there, than it would have been to stay, in the United States and pursue the degree that I'm in right now.
Yeah. What were you gonna study?
I Well, in Germany, I don't know if they had the program in now, but I'm in a master's of social work program
Oh, nice.
right now. But I mean, yeah, I guess it just really goes to show, how far right the politics are in the United States. And yeah, maybe we could chat a little bit about, the student loan payments starting to resume in February. I caught the panel you were hosting during that student debt boycott
Mhm.
summit. And then just, how, I think it's pretty interesting, who knows what would happen if Trump had won re-election, but he did pause the student loan payments and now they're set
Mhm.
to resume under Biden. So I just kind of wanted to get
Yeah,
your thoughts
it's
on
weird
that.
because it's like the pandemic now isn't significantly better than it
Yeah.
was when we put in the student loan hold. So
Yeah.
it's like kind of weird and arbitrary for them to just start it right back up now when people are still suffering financially. The virus is still spreading everywhere. I mean, the luckily the death tolls are lower now, but it's just weird because it's basically they've reached the point where they've said, okay, we're just kind of giving up on the pandemic relief stuff now. We're back to normal. Like, yeah, I know everything around you is not normal. I know that society's still crazy, but we're going to make you have to start paying your, I don't know, hundreds of dollars a month. I never even started paying my student loans after my bachelor's degree. I was just using forbearance and deferring it as much as I could because it was like, even living at home with my parents, paying $200 extra a month for, student loan payments, I wouldn't have been able to save any money to do anything.
Yeah.
And it's like I saw a statistic. I think it was like 88% of students say they're not ready to start paying their loans again. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know. And Biden even promised that he was going to cancel at least $10,000 of everybody's student loans. And now he's kind of playing this game where it's like, well, we don't know if constitutionally it's legal for us to do it by executive order, but like we know he can do it. He's just not doing it. I don't know what the strategy is there from the Biden administration if they think that the public just doesn't agree with debt cancellation, or like I don't know what they're trying to go for there, but it's going to backfire. I think that if they want young people to turn out for Democrats, it's definitely not going to happen with a policy like that.
Yeah, I mean, and he was one of the kind of main proponents of, I think it was the 90s or early 2000s when he was a senator, of making sure student loan borrowers didn't have any protections under
Mm.
bankruptcy law. So it's not, super surprising that he's not, wanting to cancel any of it now. And almost think it's kind of like, the Democrats don't really care about, improving the material conditions of the working class. Like as long as they're, the capitalist class, the real kind of puppet masters behind the scenes are like happy, then that's all that really matters. Because as you pointed out, like, it doesn't really seem like a very wise, electoral strategy to at least not even go through with the very, mild things he campaigned on. But, as long as the, people with the big money are doing okay, then that kind of seems like all that really matters,
Yeah,
right?
I
And I
mean, it makes
do,
me think of like what I saw a video earlier today. I think it was Slavoj Zizek. He was talking about how, indebting millions of young people with student loan debt prevents them from kind of reaching their political potential, because when you graduate from college, instead of thinking of what you want to do for your life, what your higher calling is in the world, instead you're focused on, okay, how can I pay off this debt? What job can I get that will help me pay off this debt? And so you don't really care what the work is doing. Maybe it's something morally questionable that you end up having to do, but you think that you have to do it because if I don't do this thing, I'm not going to be able to pay off my student loan debt. And it's like it basically traps us to the point where, we're going to be 30 years old, 40 years old, even later than that, before we're free of this debt shackle and can finally think and make decisions for ourselves. And like, it reminds me of something I learned in my human rights program about how, like, we were learning about the revolution in Haiti and how there was a group of people, like a class of people, kind of like the free people of color who weren't slaves anymore, and they had enough money of their own to where they could kind of act independently of other people. And then there are people in society who, you're so poor that you can't really, you're working for a poverty level wage. Yeah. You can't speak ill of who feeds you, or else you'll lose your ability to feed yourself and survive. And so it creates this kind of like self-censorship where you're not really free, because you might have the perception of being free, you're not a slave, but you are still indebted to your boss who keeps you alive. And so you're not free to say the things that you want. I think that's what's happening in America, where you have, millions of students in student loan debt, people in medical debt, people in all sorts of types of debt. And so they're stuck working at Applebee's or stuck working at McDonald's, or, they never got the chance to actually go to school because they didn't want to get the debt.
Yeah.
And they can't act freely or independently. And I think that's the big problem. That's why I've been so wary about what job I want to get when I graduate from school, because I'm scared that I might somehow subtly, because I don't think people realize they're doing it. I think it's just when you work somewhere and you know people and you get socialized into a certain environment, it just kind of rubs off on you. And I don't think people think enough about that before they get a job. So they wake up 5 years, 10 years from now, and maybe they realize, oh crap, this is not what I ever wanted to be doing. This is only what I felt like I had to be doing.
Yeah.
And if we could get rid of debt problems, people would be able to act more autonomously doing the things they want.
No, I think that's a really good point you bring up, and how, student loan debt particularly, but other forms of debt too, are kind of tools of social control in a capitalist system. You're not able to, realize your, full potential or self-actualization, however you want to phrase it.
Yeah.
I think that's a point very well taken. And I think it's by design, obviously. And, Joe Biden could cancel, was it like 1.71?
Oh, I think I lost you. We'll wait till it comes back on. Oh no, now it's just me here. I'll wait. Hello.
Okay, that was very weird. My computer shut down for some reason. I guess they did not like what I was talking about.
That's happened to me in like 2 or 3 different live streams where I forgot to plug my charger in and it just dies halfway through the interview. And I'm like, oh no, let me get it back on before they disappear.
Yeah, so I was just talking about how, debt is definitely a form of social control. Completely agree with you on that point. Do you think if enough people, either by choice or necessity, aren't able to pay back their student loans, if mass student debt boycott does start when those repayments resume, February 1st of 2022, do you think that would force this capitalist power structures to give any type of concessions? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it would definitely help. I know it's definitely a risky idea in the sense that, if you don't pay it long enough, they'll just start garnishing your wages. So they will just take it from you anyway. But I think that the whole point of something like that is that, power concedes nothing without a demand.
Yeah.
And if we just kind of meekly go along with it and say, oh, we hate this, but you're right, we have to pay our student loans, we're going to start paying our student loans again, what incentive is there to change anything? I think that agitation is sometimes a necessary thing to raise the issue, because imagine a scenario where even a fraction of people with student loan debt stop paying it. Even like 5-10% of people stop paying it. Now all of a sudden you have these people who are twice as much in debt, 3 times as much as in debt as they were when they initially pulled out their loans. And so I think it just kind of raises the bar where it's like, we have these people who are self-sacrificing their own financial livelihood,
Yeah.
purposely indebting themselves even more and making the situation worse because they're trying to save future generations from going through the same thing. And I think that that would be a convincing argument. And by doing the boycott, you might actually make it newsworthy enough to reach the people that you need to persuade. Because that's the problem, is that right now we're not really given a media microphone to actually raise these issues on a bigger scale. So if we actually agitate and do a student loan boycott of some sort, and then they bring us on CNN and we have people telling stories about the financial hardship they went through for this suffering, why they're doing it, how they're trying to help future generations, I think we can persuade some of those fence-sitting people. Because of course there are people who are the most ardent side of, no, you shouldn't ever cancel debt ever, because then you're just creating privileged people. Like, I think you're never going to persuade that person. But there are plenty of people, I'd say most people, probably are sympathetic to the idea, but then they have question marks of, oh, how can you afford it? And, where's the money going to come from? And then you explain to them all the economic stimulus of, now you have a generation of people who can buy a home as soon as they graduate from college. They can actually start putting money back into the economy immediately. And I think if you could just tell that story to people, it would persuade people more. But because our politicians and the people you hear on the media always couch things in very, very milquetoast, moderate ways, they're not able to effectively make that argument because they're trying to appease people instead of explain the actual opinion that we have.
Yeah, and I think those are really good points, particularly. Is that echo on my side? Okay. Yeah, I definitely think, like there probably are some people that are fearful about having their wages garnished. Somebody else on that student debt boycott, marathon that Blue Moon, Red Wine, and some others put together, they were talking about how you could ask your employer, if you're concerned about that, to have, because I guess it's not actually like the federal government, it's just these student loan servicing agencies who would be trying to garnish your wages. You could actually tell them to request a court order, and they're not always going to do that. They might, as the panelists pointed out, they might just go to the next person and hopefully they don't ask for a court order, and so on and so forth. That would be maybe one way to get around it, as well as, I guess, if you're like a 1099 contractor, which there's obviously other issues that come along with that. You're probably not getting any type of benefits or precarious work schedule or whatnot, but then they will have to ask you if they could garnish your wages. So there seems like there's a few ways to get around that. And I think I saw this article, it was like 54% of student loan borrowers, I don't know if they were in default or they were just starting to miss payments before the pandemic. So I think that number is just, like you said, 88% of people, I think was the number, aren't going to be able to pay those student loans once they resume in February of next year. And there is a Senate bill, I think it's S2598, that would grant some bankruptcy protections to student loan borrowers. And if that does get passed, I think that would be a super helpful step, because that would grant some bankruptcy protections. And, if somebody's in bankruptcy and that covers their student loans, then these people wouldn't be, getting any of that money. So I think that would kind of force the government to, work with people a little bit more, maybe forgive some of it, so people aren't filing bankruptcy and these student loan servicing agencies wouldn't be getting, any of their money. And also I think it was, important what you said about people not having, the microphone and the, corporate media, whether it's Fox or MSNBC or CNN. Like they're not having people on with, leftist politics, socialist or anti-imperialist politics. But if it reaches a certain tipping point, these massive movements, these massive stories, they're at least forced to start covering them. Obviously, always kind of from a moderate or right-wing perspective. But I think even just getting stuff like this into the mainstream media would be, super helpful, right?
Yeah, because I think it would reach people who don't use the internet as much, maybe older people, maybe people who've never heard an argument from a person who's genuinely on the left. Because I tend to notice that, like, when I talk to conservatives about Democrats, for example, they seem to think of Democrats as being all socialist, communist, left-wing people. And like sometimes I'll even explain to them, like, no, I hate Democrats. Like Democrats suck. Like liberals suck. And then they're like, wait, what? Like that's a thing? Like people on the left don't like liberals? Like I've never heard that before. And so then you almost open a whole new door to those people that they've never been exposed to, because everything is seen through a left, right, Democrat, Republican lens that doesn't really accurately tell the entire story of how people think.
Yeah, that's very important. And like the, corporate media definitely plays into that. Like it's either Democrats, Republicans, which, Democrats are either moderately right party or far right, and the Republicans are like an extreme far right party. And that's like the very narrow Overton window that you're getting your news and analysis from that perspective. I think that's why it's so important to have independent media, independent voices that aren't bought off by corporate interests, whether it's the health insurance lobby or the military industrial complex or Wall Street, etc. And if you just look at the commercials that run on these different channels, like you can see like why they frame everything as they do, because that's who's paying their bills and keeping the lights on. It kind of makes
it's crazy because I saw an article the other day, I was on NFL.com just looking at like standings, like the playoff picture, and the post was sponsored by Aetna. And I was like, I've never seen an NFL schedule thing sponsored by Aetna. Or you go on Politico and you have an article sponsored by Raytheon. Yeah. And it's like, you're Politico, you're supposed to be journalists, you're supposed to be challenging power. Is it not a conflict of interest when you have a military contractor sponsoring an article for you? It's like, I don't know, I question your independence when it comes to things like that. And like, it's just so hard, because I think a lot of people, when they get into journalism, they have this conception of like, because my bachelor's degree was in journalism. Okay. And so many people think that you have to go down the mainstream path of, getting a job at one of the 4 corporations who own every single news station in the country. And I had experience with editors at those places, and they do try to they don't tell you what to say, but it'll be kind of like, they'll encourage you to cover a certain thing, discourage you from covering a certain thing. One time I did an internship in Nepal, a journalism internship, and I wrote an article. It was just super apolitical about the World Cup. Like, who do people in Nepal support in the World Cup? And my editor added in certain statements and quotes from like the Prime Minister of Nepal, and he made it say the great Prime Minister Oli. And I'm like, but this is published in my name. Yeah. I would not have said that. Like, that makes me sound like I'm some government shill of some sort. So I kind of just nicely asked him, like, hey, I have these corrections to the article that you published of mine. Like, can you please fix this? But it's like, that's what you deal with in the editing world. It makes me think of like Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept tried to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story during the election. It's like, that's not an issue that I cared about that much, but it was a newsworthy thing, and they wouldn't let him publish it at his outlet that he founded himself. And so it's like, seeing all of that editorial control over the things you can say has what's made me always so wary about getting a job in journalism. Because the way I see it, I can do journalism no matter what my career ends up being. If I end up just getting an income source to survive that's not journalism, then my journalism can be entirely what I think it should be. I'm the one editorially controlling it. But once you have the financial motives put into play, becomes a lot trickier. Even independent journalists can fall into that trap sometimes. That's why I've been so nervous about monetizing my independent journalism, because it's like, I don't want to deal with financial incentives. I just want to say what I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's super important not to have those strings, attached, and kind of even just thinking subconsciously is like, oh, would I be able to put this out in this publication? Like, are they going to like this? Like, are they not going to renew my contract coming up? And it kind of makes me think Chomsky and Herman's, manufacturing or manufactured consent, right? And how they're not going to outright like say like, are you a communist or you socialist? Do you support like capitalism and US imperialism? Like, you're not going to get into those positions of power at the New York Times or CNN or Fox News if you're actually willing to speak truth to power on those issues. That you're just kind of filtered out through that.
It reminds me of the quote. I think the quote from that book was, or the quote that Chomsky uses is, I'm not saying that they tell you what to say. I'm just saying that if you thought something different, or if you said something different, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting right now. And that's literally what it is. Like, I used to hear from people, like in my family, they would think, because I'd talk about money in politics, and I'd be like, oh, well, that politician got money from these multinational corporations, these weapons contractors, these things like that. They're like, yeah, but just because they got money from them doesn't mean that they're being corrupted by them. And I'm like, I mean, not necessarily, doesn't mean that it's changing their opinions. It just means that their opinions already align with those opinions that they believe. So, like, it's not like I'm saying, oh, they gave you that money and all of a sudden you did a complete 180-degree turn on all of your opinions. No, it doesn't happen like that. It's like subtle and slow, and you don't even realize that it's happening.
Yep. And, those people with those massive amounts of, wealth and resources, like, they're not usually stupid people. Like, they make good investments, and investing in these, media outlets, or Jeff Bezos, buying the Washington Post, or Pierre Omidyar buying the Intercept. Like, they do that for a reason. Or like, Bill Gates becoming the largest owner of private farmland in the United States. Like, they do that to a reason. Like, it serves an interest. It's not out of the, public good, right? Even saw, haven't watched the interview, but it was MSNBC, and the title of it was like capitalism versus socialism. Maybe the order's mixed up, and the three people on the panel were Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and some other billionaire. It's like, do you think they're actually going to have an anti-capitalist critique? These people who have benefited massively through, exploiting, people and the earth to get as massively wealthy as that. It's like, and it's like just another point. I think, like, we don't really have a free press. Like, obviously, Julian Assange should be freed, and that's just a huge miscarriage of justice. But we've never, at least in my lifetime, had a free press, in the United States, when I think it's like 5 corporations control, 95% of TV, radio, and newspaper print, right? Like, so we don't really have a free press. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I completely agree, because it's like you're going to work for places where, again, you don't have full control over what you say. They kind of pick and choose what you're allowed to post about, what you're not allowed to post about. And to me, the reason why the Julian Assange example is so important is because how can you have a free press if information is classified and the public's not allowed to read it? Like, just the entire concept of classified information in the first place, to me, just sounds inherently undemocratic and inherently not something that you could have in a free press. Because if there are laws written that say, oh, if you publish classified information, you're going to get X, Y, and Z crime, now you've created this sense of fear, this community of fear around issues that we should be allowed to talk about. Like, how can we make informed decisions about war and peace if we don't even know what's being said behind closed doors? We don't even know what our government is doing in our name. And then they want to come to us at the very last minute and go, oh, yeah, by the way, do you guys support going to this war over here? But they already did everything that led up to it, and they already put all the balls in motion. So it's like, and we're not allowed to even see what they talk about or talk about what they talk about behind the scenes. I mean, that's insane to me. In America, we used to have communists in the 50s and 40s and before, like they were extra criminalized. Like even if you were just suspected of being being a communist or being friends with a communist, in America you still have to answer a question on your citizenship test that says, I am a member or I'm not a member of the Communist Party.
Oh,
like
really?
That's a question they still ask you on the citizenship test today. So it's like, no, we've never had a fully free press in America. Sometimes people think when we talk about the Julian Assange case, they think we're saying, oh, if we don't protect Assange, the free press is lost. And it's like, that's not the argument. Like, it reminds me of the same thing Democrats say when they're like, oh no, we have to stop Trump to save democracy. Like,
what
we've
democracy?
never really had democracy either. The whole point is that we don't want it to get worse.
Yeah.
So if we let them get rid of Assange, it's going to keep getting worse because now you'll have the Turkish government. The Turkish government sees what happens to Assange. Every government around the world sees what's happening. So if the U.S. sets this precedent, it's okay to arrest people who publish evidence of war crimes. Guarantee you that all the governments around the world, when they have a similar situation happen to them, they're going to say, oh, we're using the Assange precedent to do this thing. So it's like, you have to stop it now or else it will get worse because everybody sees the example the U.S. set. Like another example I thought of, in 2016, with the whole Russiagate stuff, you ended up seeing the United States government pass a law where anybody who works for Russia today has to register as a foreign agent of Russia.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so interesting in my human rights class. I'm reading an article about like foreign agent bills in all these other countries around the world. And they name all of these countries all around the world that have these bills and how messed up it is.
Yeah.
And they talked about Russia having a bill just like that. And I look at the date of when Russia passed that bill. It was after we passed the bill.
Yeah.
So why isn't this human rights article mentioning the fact that the United States set the precedent that all of these other countries are following now with the foreign agent bill? So it's like they wash us off of our complicity with when we do something, it sets the example that everybody else can then do the same thing, and people never see it that way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, I mean, just how like dystopian is like Julian Assange is being persecuted for exposing the crimes of the U.S. empire. If we actually had, a democracy that was cared about, human rights and protecting people's lives, both, internally and abroad, like they'd be going after the people that committed and ordered those, war crimes to take place, whether it's the, collateral murder video that, WikiLeaks released or any of the other, just huge services to humanity that are provided by exposing all these crimes. Like if we actually had a, just system, like those people would be held accountable instead of this, this political persecution of Julian Assange, who isn't even a U.S. citizen, right? He is a citizen, an Australian citizen. It kind of seems like that government has completely left him behind too. And it just makes me think of, this continuation under, Biden and continuing forward with this persecution of Julian Assange, and basically how, from my perspective, like the Biden administration is just Trump 2.0, but with liberal messaging and marketing. Like they talk about caring about human rights and freedom. They had like that summit for democracy while the US was still, trying to persecute Julian Assange for speaking truth to power and being a journalist. Like, the mass deportations and the kids in cages still happening under Biden. We still have like the world's largest carceral state in the land of the free. We still don't have healthcare during a pandemic, but we got to vote blue no matter who, right?
That's one thing that frustrates me so much about like how U.S. foreign policy works today too, because it's like, we hold a summit for democracy while we're doing things that betray democracy. We want to put sanctions on China for forced labor in Xinjiang, but then the 13th Amendment allows for forced labor in America.
Yeah.
Self-determination. I was writing an article about this today. We say in Taiwan, we support the self-determination of the Taiwanese people, and that any attempt by the Chinese government to change the status quo, we would be firmly against it. And we'd be militarily against it. We'd go to war with them even. But then I remembered reading about the Catalonia independence movement in 2017. And when they had their independence vote, the Spanish government sent 800 people to the hospital, stole ballots, did not approve of the vote going forward. And the logic the Spanish government used was, we believe in our territorial integrity. You know, it's unconstitutional for them to do this independence movement, whatever it is. And the US, the UK, the EU, everybody backed Spain in that example. But you know that if China were to invade Taiwan, send 800 people to the hospital who are trying to hold an independence vote, steal the ballots in that vote, we would go to war with them immediately if they did those things. Yeah. So it seems to me like we have one standard we try to hold our official enemies to, China and Russia. But then when the US and Europe do the exact same thing that we're accusing them of doing, we have kid gloves with them. We don't hold them to as strict of a standard. And that to me has like almost confused the hell out of me when it comes to understanding international relations, because it's almost like now, like, I don't know, I just think all governments are corrupt in a different way, but it almost makes it like I can see both sides of all of these arguments. Now I can fully understand why when the Chinese government and the Russian government are being antagonistic about an issue where it's like, oh, you know, I kind of do support self-determination myself in Taiwan, but I can also understand why the Chinese government is looking at everything we say in Taiwan and they're like, fuck you guys, like, you don't actually believe in what you're saying. And that's the thing, is that because we're not consistent in our principles, we're not consistently applying it across the board. I mean, who would want to listen to us? There's no reason to.
Yeah, it's like the only consistency from, like, you know, government officials within the U.S. empire is whatever serves the interest of the U.S. empire. And you just, pointed out very well the, you know, hypocrisy of, you know, talking about caring about human rights and democracy while, you know, supporting Saudi Arabia, the brutal, you know, monarchy or dictatorship there, supporting the, you know, apartheid state in Israel, while the U.S. still tries to overthrow all of these, you know, leftist socialist governments like in Cuba and, you know, Nicaragua and Venezuela and all of these countries, even if they're not, you know, leftist or socialist, if they want to chart their own independent path, like, you know, Iran or North Korea or, you know, Syria. And then, just how this new Cold War on China, like, has continued to kind of escalate under, you know, the Biden administration. And I feel like that was one of the reasons I could never vote for Biden, was because I knew U.S. imperialism would remain unchanged. And that's obviously hugely disastrous for people, you know, in the global South broadly, who, you know, are in these countries that the U.S. wants to demonize, like you pointed out, simply for wanting to chart their own course. Do you think there's any change possible within the Democratic Party, and we just need to elect, you know, more members of the squad and that will do it? Or do we think we need to seek, you know, other means of, you know, getting the change that we desperately need, both internally and, you know, abroad?
I mean, I definitely think other means are necessary. I mean, I think you can, over time, pull the entire political discourse left. You know, I'm not saying that Democrats and Republicans are going to be immovable forces. If we move super far left and they realize that we're going to take their power, like if we created a third party that got wildly popular up to 30%, 40%, it would shift. Everybody would shift with it. Like you saw, Democrats used to be against the Green New Deal, and it slowly gets more normalized because the Green Party talked about it, made it a big idea. You saw the same thing happen with the abolition of slavery in the 1850s or 1840s. There was smaller political parties that believed in abolishing slavery, and they were small at first. You know, first election it got like 0.5%. Next election it got like 2%. Next election, one of the major parties took the idea from them because they realized it was an idea that's time had come and there was no stopping it anymore. So to me, it's like, I don't think we should waste our time trying to take over the Democratic Party, trying to work within and things like that, because to me, it's like, it's just going to change you more than you're going to change the party. Yes. But if you operate from the outside of the party and you're actually pushing for the things that you believe in, you're not being changed by the party because you're still being true to what you believe in. And you'll change enough minds in society that the party will try to co-opt you. Or if we're lucky, we finally build a movement like other countries have, and you can just have a new party rise to power and take power. And that's something I think we're so missing in America, is that in countries in Europe, countries in Latin America, countries that have democracies, they have a tendency where if they don't like their ruling parties, everybody goes, oh, well, this new party over here is kind of cool. Why don't we go support that? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, one election cycle, you see it rise to power. Then in America, we have this mindset of, oh, it'll take too long to build a third party. We can't do it. That's not possible. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but clearly the rest of the world is able to do it. So clearly we're able to do it. We're just not trying. But electoralism aside, like that's my electoral strategy, is build a third party where we can actually believe what we want. But I think direct action is much, much, much more likely to actually change things, because elections are only every 2 years, every 4 years. Whereas if you do direct action, you could do it every single day of your life. You can be doing some form of direct action, and that's more likely to change things than just one vote every 2 or 4 years.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like electoral politics should be should occupy a very small space in your overall kind of, political transformation, type of plan or ideology. And then, I think you made a really good point. Like if these, people, the members of the squad, whoever else, if they're actually a threat to these systems, they wouldn't have been able to get, elected into the positions that they are. And that's kind of played itself out to be, very true, and just kind of the go along to get along mentality when, the Congressional Progressive Caucus has like 95, 100 members. So if they actually wanted to get things done, like they could, they choose not to. They got into those positions for a reason, and definitely direct action is super important. And I think, that's also like something like why a coordinated, organized general strike that happened, hopefully across, the United States and multiple cities in each state across different, sectors would be able to move mountains, frankly, because it would strike the capitalist class where it hurts them, the only place it hurts them, and that's in the, pocketbook, right? And I think that's also one of the reasons why, they have these laws in place to criminalize things like the, wildcat strike, striking in solidarity with, other places, other industries. And it would take, frankly, some people engaging in that type of activity, because we've seen these strike movements kind of gaining momentum as people's material conditions have continued to get worse, people having to work longer and more dangerous hours for less wages, with less benefits, less, retirement protections. But we need to have just that expanded, more broadly, right?
Yeah, I think labor organizing in general is like a bigger deal than electoral politics for the most part, because it's like, that's how you actually improve our wages without having to rely on politicians to do it for us. And like in Sweden, they don't even have a minimum wage law. It's just that because they have 80% union membership, the unions drive the wages up to the point where a McDonald's worker makes like $20 an hour almost and has 6 weeks of vacation time. And even if you're not in a union, because 80% of jobs are unions, and they're usually organized not just based on your workplace, they're organized based on your sector. So it'll be like the housing sector, the environmental sector, like different places. So even if you're in that sector, but you're not in the union, you're still benefiting because the majority of people are in that union. And so the standards for the entire society have gotten set higher. And I think we can affect change much, much more doing that than trying to take over this immovable machine that's the Democratic Party that won't even let you say all the things that you believe, or else you get ostracized from the party entirely. So it's like working class change. And I think people get caught up in partisanship. People get caught up too much in electoralism. It's almost like you dehumanize people who don't identify the same way as you. So if you're a Democrat, you think Republicans are evil. If you're a Republican, you think Democrats are evil. Even sometimes third party people can think everybody's evil. And then you have no idea who to trust in the entire world because, oh my gosh, everybody's evil. But then it's like, it helps you to understand more when you're outside of the partisan view, because you can actually interact with people on a one-on-one level, understand that they are different from their politics. Not always. Sometimes people are genuinely bad people, but for the most part, people are not their partisan affiliation. They are just people who have certain opinions.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I had a conversation with my dad the other day, and he's 59, 60 years old, and his politics are definitely much more to the right than mine, like usually voting like Republican, that type of thing. But like we were able to have a conversation about how basically this whole system is rigged to only benefit a very few, the capitalist class at the top, while the working class like suffers. And like I think most people, like, you're able to have that type of conversation with them, and they understand that, unless they've been just completely brainwashed and drunk on this capitalist propaganda, this whole kind of pull yourselves up by the bootstraps mentality. But I think most people are getting increasingly fed up with the corporate duopoly, because they see neither party working in their interest, while pretending to in certain ways, but not really following through with that. And I think what you brought up earlier is super important, like the importance of building power outside the corporate duopoly. And I think that's also one of the reasons the Democrats and Republicans make it so difficult for third-party candidates to get on the debate stage or to have ballot access, because if they are presented with these policies from a different perspective, that would actually improve their material conditions. Like, oh, that's actually promising. So obviously, I think that's a huge reason why the corporate duopoly tries to stymie these.
I think that's the biggest reason, because I think that people underestimate how much you can change with not that many people. I think people underestimate the idea that even if you just had them on the debate stage, able to confront them on these issues directly, you'd have somebody like Jill Stein, the Green Party, they'd be making arguments that nobody has ever hearing on corporate media, ever. And most people, like you said, don't like the two-party system. Polls have showed since 2006, there's a Gallup poll that showed most Americans think a third party is necessary. And I think the only reason they don't vote third party is because people don't seek out this information, right? They basically go with what the popular opinion is, what the news of the day is. And if these two major parties are all you hear about, you might think to yourself, I think most people I talk to, they're like, yeah, I think both parties are corrupt, but I think that other one is more corrupt, and the one that you like sounds pretty good. I kind of like those third parties, but they can't win. They're so small, it doesn't really matter. And it's like, if you could just change that one dynamic and make it so that, okay, now on the news, you're hearing about the third parties equally as often as you're hearing about the two major parties, you would see people's opinions change really quickly, because they're just kind of going with what they know. And if you don't know any different, you're not going to behave any differently. And it took me a long time to get to the point. I've been supporting third parties off and on since like 2012. When I was in high school, I learned about third parties, and I always knew the two parties were corrupt for some reason. I didn't fully understand why I thought that in high school. I think it was the Iraq War and 2008 and stuff like that. But it took me until this past election cycle to get to the point where I was like, no, I am not going back to the two parties. Because after 2016, I voted Jill Stein, but then I let Bernie and the squad, I let them both kind of wrap me back in. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe we will take over the party, but I'll only support that effort to take over the party. I won't support the corporate Democrats. And then seeing how they've handled it since then, where AOC went from protesting at Nancy Pelosi's office to calling her mama bear and supporting her for Speaker of the House, that was the moment for me that it clicked in my head, where I was like, oh, that's what happens when you try to take over the Democratic Party. No, I don't want to fall back for that ever again. But yeah, it took me time, and I was somebody who was predisposed to supporting third parties. So I know there are plenty of people out there who don't agree with us, or who only marginally agree with us, who, if you just work on them for a little bit and talk to them for a little bit, eventually they will change their mind.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I don't even know if the particular party like exists right now that would be able to gain enough traction and support to pull the corporate duopoly to the left, to actually pass some policies that would really help the working class, particularly the most vulnerable and marginalized elements. And I wonder if maybe the best strategy for that would just be, I don't know, some type of like independent party or politician, something like that. Somebody that's not, is tied up with, maybe, ideological kind of hangups, or stuff like that, and just really goes on a very kind of policy-based, platform, because actually, a vast majority of people want everybody to have healthcare. They want a sustainable, economic system, so we have an habitable planet for, us and all these other species. Like Green New Deal, kind of important for that, right? Or, public infrastructure, or so everybody has a house, so everybody has healthcare during a pandemic. Like a vast majority of people support these policies. It's just that those policies go against the interest of the, capitalist class.
That's what I found so inspiring about Chile. So Chile, a few years ago, had mass protests. They ended up getting a referendum to rewrite their entire constitution. And I actually remembered hearing that the people, because they had a constitutional assembly who sits to write it, and a lot of the people who were getting elected were independents. So they were people who were not a part of any party. They were just talking about, like you said, the policies, the ideas. And I've been reading about in Sweden, people are more likely to just vote not based on a partisan line, but based off of policies. They'll cross ticket. They'll vote for a different local party than a national party. And it seems like young people in general are kind of getting more into the point of not really caring about partisanship globally as much as just what people believe in. Mm-hmm. But I think that having a multi-party system would be immensely helpful for that, because a multi-party, like parliamentary type of system, because in Sweden, you've got 8 or 9 major parties. Major party just needs to get you like 5%, 4% of the vote. And so the Green Party, who only has 4% of the vote in Sweden, they are the kingmaker in the Congress. They are the difference between a left-wing and a right-wing coalition government, which means that 4% of the population has an outsized influence. They actually have a voice in the process. They actually have to get listened to. Whereas in America, because we only have two, not even extremes, just 2 different parties, and only those 2 different parties, you only have 2, you have more than 2 opinions represented, but it's like basically everybody falls in line with the groupthink of one or the other. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we had a system where there's 5 different, 6 different, 7 different, everybody could say their own genuine opinion. Because I think Democrats and Republicans, like constituents, say their real opinions, like real people say their real opinions, but politicians say what's going to get them elected. And that's usually not their real opinions. I always have conspiracy theories to myself of what do these politicians really believe, and what are they just saying because they think that that's what we want to hear? And I think our 2-party system incentivizes them to behave that way. Whereas a multi-party system, if you have 6 different options, you're just going to go with the one that you actually think like.
No, that's a really, good point. And it would be so beneficial to have that multi-party system, like you were talking about, to have, this multiplicity of, ideas, different policy proposals, and how just that small party, like the Green Party in Sweden, you said gets around 4% of the vote, and yet they can play a pretty outsized role just based on, the political dynamics of that system. And we could definitely have something similar here. I guess it's just how do we get to that point, right? And
there is a bill, I can't remember what it's called. It was written by my congressman here, Jimmy Rashkin, but it would make it so that instead of districts being 1 representative, it would be multi-member districts. So like 3 or 4 politicians per district, ranked choice voting, and proportional representation. And I think proportional representation is the big thing, because then you'd have it in a situation where, so imagine your state has, 50% one party, 25% one party, 25% another party. Now your district has 3 different parties represented, whereas before it would just be represented by the 50%, and nobody even knows that anybody else exists, and you're not a constituency that they care to cater to. So I think a bill like that would be helpful. And again, none of this solves all of the problems in the system, right? These are just Band-Aids to make electoralism a little bit less shitty. But I still think that that's way better than what we have now, where everybody feels forced to just go along with groupthink. And I just hate having to feel like you're trapped in only 2 options.
Yeah, because it's like, Democrat, Republican. It's like, a poop sandwich or a poop sandwich with like mustard on it or something.
And that's
like,
the most. That's like, people love when you say that. Like in my experience, it's so refreshing to people when you say, "Yeah, fuck both the parties." People look at me and they're like, "Oh yeah, I like that guy." Like, or I'll wear my shirt. It says Democrats, Republicans, pizza, and the check is on pizza. And yeah, that's like my most complimented shirt. Like, and that's how I convince people who are conservative to move left, because they trust me more once I tell them, "Yeah, fuck Hillary Clinton, fuck Joe Biden, like they're corrupt pieces of shit." They all of a sudden have a reason to feel like they can trust you. And then you can explain to them why also their Republican politicians are also fucked up in the exact same type of way I'm telling you these Democrats are. And once you lay that out for them, then maybe they start off by saying, "Oh yeah, but I think Republicans are the lesser of two evils." But once you've gotten to the point where they admit that those things that Democrats and Republicans both do are evil, you have helped move them further left than you could have if you were a Democrat just calling them a conservative piece of shit. Because then they're just going to say, "Fuck you," and not listen to you at all.
No, it's important and be able to have those conversations with people, particularly on, opposite ends maybe of the political spectrum, is super helpful. And that's why I also think it's really important to have, a structural critique and both parties aren't serving the working class, particularly, the most vulnerable and marginalized elements of it. It's like, they serve, capitalism, they serve white supremacy, they serve, U.S. imperialism. None of those things are benefiting you because the party is controlled by, very wealthy capitalist elite at the top, and the working class is fighting for crumbs, and we're fighting, with each other when we need to be, uniting and trying to find different ways to, advance the interests of the, working class, as opposed to fighting with each other, right?
Yeah, and that's the hard part, is convincing people to not fight with each other. Because I mean, a lot of the times the fighting with each other has justified reasons. Like the fighting is not baseless. Like usually there is a good reason to be arguing with each other. But I think where people get caught up is they value that interpersonal disagreement way too much, and they put more fire at each other than they do at the politicians. So, because like racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, those are all tools of the rich to keep us fighting amongst each other, so we don't realize that they're the ones screwing us over. So yeah, it's okay to like have judgmental disagreements with other working class people, but I think we have to not let it prevent us from organizing with each other. Because if you have a workplace, there are going to be people of all sorts of ideologies in your workplace. But if we want to inspire them to go on strike, you might have to set aside one or two of your serious disagreements with that person to agree, okay, but we need to make our boss pay us more. If you can at least agree on making your boss pay you more, okay, just agree on that. Don't agree on anything else, and that's great. But so many people aren't willing to even just do that, because I can't work with that person. They're a piece of shit because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah. It's like, yeah, but you need lots of pieces of shit to actually get anything done. So like, gotta at least bite the bullet sometimes. Like,
yeah, because like more often than not, you're not gonna agree ideologically with somebody 100% of the time on 100% of the issues. So being able to form those coalitions for, narrow defined goal and working with people who you may not agree with on everything is like super important if we actually want to get stuff done. And it's, obviously also very important, like you were saying, to be able to have disagreements with people, to be able to, as Mao talked about, engage in criticism and self-criticism and take that feedback, especially when, you're, in the wrong on something, and, gain some more political education on something, but also not kind of lose sight of these, bigger things that we need to be.
And I think it's such an interesting comparison to like think about. So like, as we're talking about this as working class people, like how we have to work together to stop the rich. And I think sometimes politicians also believe in this same thing, but I think they mistake it with appeasing the people who don't think like them at all. Like, that's why I think that Democrats are like, no, we need the Joe Manchins in our party because you got to work with people you don't agree with all the time. And I'm like, no, like you have to work with Joe Manchin sometimes or talk about with him sometimes, But that doesn't mean you have to be in the same party as him. That doesn't mean you need to be on the same team as him. And that doesn't mean you should censor yourself when criticizing him. Like, okay, if Joe Manchin wants to support us on Medicare for all, if Joe Manchin wants to support us on, I don't know, any bill, cutting the military budget that we agree on, great.
Yeah.
But when he's not doing that and you're still cutting him slack, it's like, no, that doesn't apply to people like Joe Manchin. If Joe Manchin, the person, if I work with Joe Manchin at my, I don't know, union job down the street, okay, yeah, we can put our differences aside. That's not what's happening in Congress. What's happening in Congress is they're applying that standard to politicians and not doing what politicians are supposed to do, which is disagree on the issues.
And like he's a person in a position of immense like power, right? Like he has, you know, this huge, massive platform and votes on things that have real, you know, massive implications for people's lives for what he doesn't or doesn't support, as opposed to, you know, somebody on the street or somebody in your personal life that you don't have, that you have a political disagreement with. Like those, I feel like, are two completely different things. And when a politician is on the wrong side of something, like you need to be able to hold their feet to the fire, keep them accountable to actually do the right thing and call them out on their bullshit. But when they do something good, okay, highlight that, say they did something good.
But that's what's so frustrating, I think, about how you see politicians act in Congress, because I think in their heads, that's how they justify it to themselves, is that he's just that conservative person that you have to get along with because you got to get along with people to work together.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, but that doesn't mean you go from being AOC protesting outside of Nancy Pelosi's office to all of a sudden supporting Nancy Pelosi for a leadership position. Like, that's a very big difference. You can be nice to Nancy Pelosi, say hi to her, have a coffee with her or something because you're in the same workplace. Okay, you're both politicians. That doesn't mean you have to acquiesce to their system of government and her entire political worldview, which is what it feels like the squad ended up doing. They went from being this insurgency, which we all thought they were, this leftist insurgency in the party, like the Tea Party of the left of some sort. And then they ended up not actually being that. And that's why I think it needs to be a third party movement, because then, okay, I'm on this team, you're on that team. You know, multi-party governments, you have to work together with people in other parties. You don't start from that position, though. You start from the position of fierce disagreement. Whereas when you're in the same party, there's like this implicit understanding that you have to start from a position of a similar position at the very beginning.
Yeah, it made me think when you brought up AOC, she was asked, I think, by Max Blumenthal, the Gray Zone. It was either about the U.S. meddling and intervention efforts in, it was either Bolivia or Venezuela, and she said,
we defer to leadership.
Defer to leadership on that. Yeah, that's what that made me think of. And yeah, just super important, to create this like multi-party system, something that we don't have right now, and something that we, you know, desperately need, frankly, because people's material conditions continue to get worse and worse. And
I just wonder, how does it happen? Like, when does it happen? Will it ever happen? Because even as somebody who genuinely believes in it, genuinely fights for it, even I face pessimism sometimes where it's like, yeah, I mean, I've been reading about a multi-party system for 10 years now, and it feels like we're no closer to making it happen. So it's like, how do we actually get to that point? And that's why I think I focus so much on attacking the two-party system and the Democrats, because the only way it's going to break is if we make it break. The only way that a two-party system is going to, or a three-party system, four-party system is going to happen is if we start actually making that demand. Because like we've said, 60% of people want it, but only a tiny fraction of those 60% of people are on the stage of actively trying to make it happen. And I think that's where we need to go. I actually have to go.
Yeah.
So any last words? Any last questions?
Maybe I guess I always like to end on something like positive that you see happen in the world, since some of this was like, oh, there's a lot of fucked up shit. Maybe, you know, something that you see positive going on.
Something I see positive going on. I don't know. It's a tough one. I think despite how toxic politics seems sometimes and how hopeless it feels sometimes, I do tend to believe that things get better as time goes on, even if it's only minor, even if it's only to slight degrees. Like, I think that now we're at the point where, like, I don't know, world governments are talking about Julian Assange. Before, they all pretty much universally viewed him as a threat to their secrets and their secrecy. And now you're seeing a point where a lot of them are talking about him. Biden has dropped less drone strikes during his presidency than Trump or Obama did. So the rate of drone strikes has gone down. Obviously, even one is too many for me, but it's good that they've at least improved on that a little bit. I don't know. I think more people are starting to wake up to how corrupt the two-party system is. I think Biden has helped teach young people how voting Democrat doesn't necessarily make things better, that he is kind of just Trump 2.0, but with a nicer smile. I think that people do realize that almost universally. I don't know. I've traveled the world. I've been to Nepal. Even in Nepal, they talk about how people hate capitalism. They overthrew their monarchy. They have a communist government. They would admit their government's corrupt, but they like that it's, at least some good talk on class divides. They want to get rid of the caste system in Nepal. So I don't know. I think young people globally seem further left, I think, than older generations. And that's the kind of thing that gives me hope that even if we might not live to see the change get much better, I do think that the seeds we lay now do end up coming up someday, whether it be next year or whether it be 10 years from now. It will eventually, I think, get better.
100%. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and maybe just shout out where people can find you on social media.
So on Twitter, it's where I am mostly. It's ProPeace97. On YouTube, it's the ProPeace Report. And on Substack, which I don't use as much, but I'm going to start using more soon, it's also the ProPeace Report. But that's it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, no problem.
Peace out, guys.